I was on with three ghouls who I found out in advance because I always ask, who am I going to be on with? And I found out that these three ghouls all support RFK Jr. Actually, I had a little bit of a question about one of them. So from left to right, and if you're listening, doesn't matter. You got a man named Brian Johnson, who we will do a deep dive into in a little bit, who is trying to live forever. You've got Deborah Birx, who sort of famously was Donald Trump's, doctor who was the anti-Fauci during the COVID epidemic. Deborah Birx was out there every single day before Trump's press conferences saying that, we're doing a great job, everything's fine. And, Donald Trump understands the statistics incredibly well. He's very good at understanding them. And as he then got up to the mic and said, maybe we can inject something into people's veins. Maybe you should inject some bleach, or there's got to be a way to blot it out, or maybe stare at the sun, or whatever the hell he said. Ivermectin and all this. There's ways and all this. So she absolutely whitewashed the COVID response. Now, here was the thing with Deborah. I was like, maybe Deborah's like seen the light. You know what I'm saying? Maybe like she draws the line at RFK Jr. So I'm going into this thinking maybe she's seen the light. Now, this other dude, you guys might know, his name is Grant Cardone, or Cardone. He's a paisan, obviously, and he's a massive grifter. He's one of these wealth influencer grifters, smokes cigars and burns money on videos to he's for dumbasses. He's for people who and he tells you regular things like you should invest your money instead of have it in a savings account. Hey, thanks, dumbass, for telling me something super obvious. So those are the people that they put me on. And I was like, okay, great. Now, Piers always does his intros. He did his intro very, very soft pedaling. Basically, I've interviewed RFK Jr. I think there's nothing wrong with him. I think he cares. Francesca, what do you think? And I had something to say.
Very skeptical. I'd heard a lot of stuff about him being a crazy conspiracy theorist and so on. I've interviewed him probably 4 or 5 times since then, and I didn't get the feeling I was with a madman. I got a feeling I was with a guy who's immersed himself into health issues for many decades, that he has some opinions which others don't like, but that broadly speaking, he comes from a good place of wanting to make America a healthier place. What's wrong with that?
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think he is the picture of health himself. I mean, he's a roided up 70-year-old who doesn't believe in germ theory and eats roadkill. I think that is perfect. He sounds like he's speaking into a fan half the time, and he doesn't believe in vaccines. He wants to replace healthcare in this country with Ozempic. And he also wants to limit access to antidepressants and psychiatric meds for all Americans and replace it with things like meditation. If we think we have a mental health care crisis in this country now, just you wait until RFK Jr. is finished with this country. If you think there is some sort of drug epidemic, people are going to be buying Adderall on the black market in insane amounts. He also thinks that Jewish people and Chinese people can't get COVID. That was a fun one. You should tell that to my uncle. Oh, wait, he's dead. Also, 83 Samoans also dead from the anti-vax work that he did in American Samoa. Just as there's a measles outbreak in Texas right now because of the kind of lies about vaccines that he has spilled. But honestly, Piers, other than that, truly a picture of health.
Right.
So here's what I'm going to do. If you're going to let me talk, I'm going to finish my goddamn thought. I'm going to get it all in there, right? I know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to finish it. So yes, that was a beautiful, uninterrupted, about 1.5 minutes of me laying out the case. So you're going to give me a door, I'm going to walk right through that door, and I'm going to roll out my carpet. I'm going to set out my little tea party on your ass, okay? That's what's going to happen, and that's what continues to happen throughout this 30-minute conversation that is so mind-numbingly stupid, fat-phobic, and messed up. Half the time, by the way, and I'm only going to jump to a few portions of this discussion. So Brian Johnson wants to live forever, so he's on some other. Deborah Birx is on some I think, basically avoiding the question of RFK Jr. being a threat. And we'll talk about Deborah in a little bit. Grant's like, I don't see what's wrong with RFK Jr. This is fine. I mean, I'm sure he's got some supplements to hawk. So like, none of them are actually trying to engage in any serious conversation. We are like, we're on Mars. We're beyond Mars, right? We're on the planets that were rescinded as being planets. So it's very clear. And I'm really trying to get through to the people who might be watching. And I didn't even talk about bird flu, that RFK Jr. is a massive threat to everyone's health. And so Deborah comes in next, and I'm like, let's see how she handles it. Like, where's she at? You know, what's going on? Maybe she was wronged. I read a Slate article that was like Deborah Birx was put in a terrible position. She had to play good cop, and Fauci was the bad cop, and maybe da 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 da. And so I was like, let me see what Deborah's up to, and then you'll see how it plays out.
You certainly painted a rosy picture of the forthcoming health secretary. Deborah, let me ask you. I mean, look, you're a medical expert. You specialized in HIV/AIDS immunology, vaccine research, global health. I remember you obviously center stage in the Trump COVID era. What do you make of RFK? I mean, do you think he's dangerous? Is he misguided in some areas? Is he broadly right? What's your overview of him?
Well, we're finally having the discussions that we needed to have, frank discussions about the health of this country. I got to travel the country for...
Okay. So quick follow-up. What are those discussions? We're finally having the discussions, which the right loves to do. They love to be really cagey about finally we're having the discussions about, the bureaucracy. Okay, what though? What specifically? Be specific. So this is when I was like, okay, we're finally having discussions, and I was like, all right, let me hear her out. What is she? But that initial entry, we're finally having discussions. It's like, mamma mia, this is how it starts.
Many months during COVID working at the state level and the community level. And what I witnessed was a lot of undiagnosed disease that could have been treated early that then resulted in COVID deaths.
That's what we're finally talking about. Do you hear that? What we witnessed was undiagnosed disease that resulted in COVID deaths. In other words, comorbidities. In other words, dying of COVID was your fault. Person with diabetes. Dying of COVID was your fault. Person with cancer. Dying of COVID was your fault. Person over the age of 65. Dying of COVID was your fault. Person with immunocompromised, some kind of immunocompromised situation. Like that dying of COVID was on you. Finally, we're having the discussion that I was trying to have all along, which was to blame the COVID deaths, 1 million Americans dying, on themselves. Yes.
And I saw a health system that had completely deteriorated in our rural areas. Our rural areas really don't have access to healthcare anymore. And the hub and spoke model that we had set up to get really sick people into the regional medical centers, they were overwhelmed themselves. So COVID pointed out.
She's making a great point. All right, rural areas need better health access. Amazing point, but there we go.
A lot of our issues with chronic disease, like with early HIV, when we started, we were only treating those with symptoms. Well, that was the tip of the iceberg.
First of all, when it started, you weren't treating people. I'm sorry, let's just be honest. You study HIV, bitch. Like when HIV started, you weren't treating anybody. Why? Because you thought it was a gay disease. Because you blamed gay people. You thought they were being punished by God. So miss me with this. We only started with, people with symptoms. Shut up. It took years and massive amounts of protest for people to get doctors to take them seriously when they were dying by the dozens.
When we finally started working and finding asymptomatic individuals and getting them on treatment early before they had evidence of disease, they could thrive. So what I'm hoping is this is a moment we work with Americans to reverse those early signs of disease and prevent the progression. And then we won't have frank diabetes and hypertension and stroke. We'll have a very different outcome. I see you shaking your head, but I actually have data. And so
I see you shaking your head. She looked so she can see me. And I was just like, I'm disappointed.
Oh, data, I think trumps. I'm right now in West Texas, was out in West Texas for the last year, documenting the number of people who have asymptomatic early diabetes. 58% in this community, a rural community that was picked relatively at random. 58% of individuals already had pre-diabetic or diabetic states, and another 60% were already hypertensive. None of them knew they were. They were all in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. This is our moment where we can actually tackle the issues that everyone has been ignoring for more than 2 decades.
But can I just ask the doctor? I mean, I'm surprised that you are a doctor. I believe in preventative medicine, and I think that RFK Jr. does a really good job of hiding the ball when he says things like chronic disease. I absolutely believe in that. The number one way to stop chronic disease is to have access to a doctor, to have regular checkups. 40 million people in Texas alone are uninsured. And a lot of them buy into some of the quack science that RFK Jr. is trotting out there, which is why if you were in West Texas, you should know that there is a massive amount of people who don't get vaccinations. And that's why we've got a measles outbreak right now. So in order to say, okay, you were the COVID, we know you're the COVID. 40 million people is too many, by the way. It's more like 5 million. I think I was... It's the highest uninsured number in the country, right? So I just want to say that I went to Texas, obviously talked about, healthcare. That was for my MSNBC special, Red, White, and Who. So like her saying, like, this is the question I kept on asking every single person. Grant was sort of a zero on all of it, but was like, do you believe in universal healthcare? Because you can't treat chronic disease if you can't get a diagnosis, or you can't get, even to get the diagnosis, the actual, the scans that you need are too expensive to even properly diagnose you, or you can only get one once a year, right? Mammograms should be starting far earlier than age 40, because many women in their 30s, 20s are getting breast cancer, but no insurance will cover it, so it's insanely expensive, lady, right? I'm not trying to come down. Okay, let's back up, because Franny kind of cooking here. Chronic disease is to have access to a doctor, to have regular checkups. 40 million people in Texas alone are uninsured. And a lot of them buy into some of the quack science that RFK Jr. is trotting out there, which is why if you were in West Texas, you should know that there is a massive amount of people who don't get vaccinations. And that's why we've got a measles outbreak right now. So in order to say, okay, you were the COVID, we know you're the COVID lady, right? I'm not trying to come down on you on that. I think you could have done a lot better of a job. You obviously were responsible for papering over Trump's worst wiles, like injecting bleach into, your system in addition to ivermectin. Please don't at me, all the ivermectin psychos. I just had to get that in there, because so far no emails from ivermectin freaks, but I feel like there's a lot of ivermectin freaks out there like, actually, I've got more muscle mass thanks to ivermectin. I love a horse dewormer. I shout out all the worms. Sure, I piss my pants and I shit my pants while I'm in line at Walmart. And, we know he liked you because you wore a pretty scarf and, you're nice to look at. And that's great. But you're also a doctor and you have a responsibility. So you have to tell the American people that it's the fact that they can't get access to affordable meds. They can't get access to a doctor without charging them an arm and a leg for basic things. If you need, let's say, a CT scan or an X-ray, right? If you have like Franny's brain broke here because I was trying to think of a kidney stone, because I met someone in Utah, a guy who was like in his 30s, and he had a kidney stone, but he couldn't get a CT scan to properly see where the kidney stone was because he wasn't passing it. And so he had to get an X-ray, and it didn't tell him anything, but they wanted to give him the X-ray, I think, was $700, and he could barely afford that. And then the CT scan was even more, so they could detect exactly where it was, but he never got the CT scan. He just passed it in the most like painful way. And then because he couldn't pass the kidney stone for it was a really long time, he started using painkillers. And so trust me, and that the lack of treating our pain leads to the very things, and we'll talk about it in a second, the very addiction to pain meds, in addition to like the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma pushing things like Oxycontin. So that's what I was attempting to explain here. all kinds of just basic things, that you're not allowed to get that without being charged an arm and a leg. I've done work on this as a journalist. I've interviewed people who refused to go to the doctor because they cannot afford it. RFK Jr. does not believe in healthcare for all people. He says it's too expensive. Meanwhile, he wants to hawk everyone a bunch of supplements, and under his FDA, I'm sure a bunch of stuff is going to be approved of.
Okay, well, before I go to the other two guests who've not had a chance to contribute yet, I think it's only fair that, Deborah, you get to respond to that. So what would you say?
No, it's always disappointing to me when you have to degrade somebody to actually have a clear discussion.
Fuck you. You know what I'm saying? Like, fuck you. That's it. That's all I have to say. Fuck you. You have to degrade somebody. Oh, because I said you wore a pretty scarf and you were the COVID lady and you were nice to look at. First of all, two of those are compliments. COVID lady may be more of a diss, but like, you have blood on your hands. I'm sorry. You have blood on your hands. You spun a bunch of lies. You lied to the American people. You made it look like a doctor was validating a dumbass Donald Trump's claims about COVID-19. And now you want people to be nice to you? I don't think so. And look, she's not the craziest of all of them. We'll get into him in a minute. But like, don't think that, again, this is the moment where the elite meets the plebe. Hello, I am plebe. I am someone who would never get a chance to interview Dr. Deborah Birx ever. So this is my moment. And I'm going to represent the millions of Americans who lost a loved one, including me, during COVID because of some of the lies that this administration was telling about it. So sorry if you live in a bubble in West Texas and you go around and flit around the world and nobody actually talks to you or steps to you, but I'm going to step to you a little bit because there's a lot of us who would like some accountability for what went down.
What I'm trying to be very clear on is there are people with insurance who are undiagnosed because they don't have time to go to the doctor because they're working 7 days a week. So we have to, in the medical community, adjust to people's needs. We can't do this one size fits all, that urban areas have access and a lot of rural areas do not have access. Yes, sure, insurance was an issue for a group of people and still remains an issue for some, but it doesn't answer all of our questions. And so just picking your specific argument and not recognizing that America is a very diverse country with a diverse set of needs. And what I'm telling you,
How will RFK Jr. make it better?
RFK is already making it better by having a frank discussion about healthcare needs in this country and the level of chronic disease and the fact that our food has all of these additives, which we know now. I mean, I'm sure you support the fact.
He's already making it better by asking questions. First of all, notice how Francesca, the actual journalist, is asking her a pointed question that fake journalist Piers Morgan will never ask her. How will RFK Jr. make the country's health better? So she's just blah, 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 blah. Franny gets to the point. How will RFK Jr. make it better? Now she's spinning a bunch of other crap. But I'm saying, let's stop wasting people's time. Ask them an actual question.
Fact that the gut microbiome is critically important.
Wait, this is my favorite. He's asking questions and he's finally talking about the gut microbiome. You guys, the gut microbiome. Now, you don't got to tell me. You guys see me. I drink kombucha like it's going on. I drink hella kombucha. I love talking about the gut microbiome. But miss me on this. We, in the United States, the only developed country without universal health care, publicly funded health care for all people, that the first conversation we need to have is the gut microbiome? You live on another planet. You, not as much as another guy does, though.
And we've been abusing our gut microbiome for decades with these food additives. And now we know that our gut microbiome, which none of us in the 1980s when we were trained really paid attention to, he's waking people up to that issue of food, gut microbiome,
well,
connections
let's talk about
with
food. I mean, really
okay,
quickly,
well, hang on. Let me bring in, we've got two other guests.
Okay, so I relented there because I felt bad. I was talking a lot. I didn't feel bad, but that at some point, this is fun, guys. They do lower my volume. So they lower my volume so that nobody can hear me, which is fun because I could try to raise my volume on my end, but they lowered it. which was a good moment.
Is he anti-vaccination, period? He said absolutely not. And in fact, his own kids have been immunized against various things. He's very skeptical, as many people are, about...
So this is Piers Morgan straight up laundering the idea that RFK Jr. is the anti-vax guy. And so he's laundering his entire history of being against vaccines, then using the fact that his own children allegedly are immunized, which is like, well, that means nothing. I mean, we all know that means nothing. We all know Fox News during COVID had COVID protocols so they could safely spout all of their lies about the disease from their perch, their safe, health conscious perch. Like, we all know that. So it says nothing that your own kids are vaccinated, but here's Piers laundering RFK's very long and documented past being an anti-vaxxer.
COVID vaccines, particularly the mRNA vaccines. I was with, for what it's worth, one of the top cancer experts in Britain for lunch a couple of days ago, who was utterly scathing about the long-term impact of the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, and says that they're reaping a whirlwind in the world of cancer, for example, as a result of the vaccines. Not to say that I personally believe they saved many lives, but did we have enough time to examine the potential consequences? Almost certainly not. So he's been skeptical about that, but he's not anti-vaccine, as many people like to portray him.
Except that he founded an organization, the Children's Health Defense League, that is straight up against vaccinations. They are selling onesies for babies that says, unvaxxed and unafraid, right? Like, that's what I think it was Unbothered doing. They're an anti-vax organization. That's what he has done for decades now. I just want to name, trust me, if we think that ripping people's psychiatric meds away is going to be beneficial for the health of this country, you have another thing coming. We are going to see.
Actually, I do think it's a good idea. Well, hang on.
Drug epidemic.
Hang on.
We're gonna.
No, you hang on. To answer that point, I do. America is ridiculously over-medicated, particularly in the area of antidepressant drugs and anxiety drugs and so on. And Britain's going the same way.
No, I think it's great. I think it's great.
There are millions of young people.
You know what? So he starts to go on about the young people who are diagnosing. Now, look, I think it is important to name that we rely on prescription drugs a lot. That is very, very clear. We've got a massive big pharma lobby. I'm in agreement on that. But as someone who is married to someone with ADHD, who relies on Adderall, and the fact that there was a supply chain problem and there was a lack of access to Adderall. Number one, it's very difficult to get access to some of these drugs. You have to see your doctor every single month. They sort of re-diagnose you. You tell them the same things. They give you a very, very limited amount, and it helps you survive. I'm also someone who is a comedian, and oh my God, the amount of depression in the stand-up comedy community that obviously we're funny, but we also are dark, I know so many people. My best friend suffered from depression, still suffers from depression, uses Wellbutrin. All of the people that I know in my life who would be dead or would be very dysfunctional were it not for psychiatric meds. It's I don't know. It's I learned a long time ago to not be judgmental about these things and to actually believe people when they tell you that they're better with meds, and to support them and whatever they want to do. Remember, my body, my choice. I think it's so ridiculous that you're having this conversation. But more broadly, and this is something that we've talked about on my show, The Bitchuation Room, and the point I made 3 different times on this panel was, if you rip people's meds away, they will try to find it in the black market. There will suddenly, you think you're trying to battle drug cartels now? Wait till the Mexican cartels start running Adderall across the border. Wait till the Mexican cartels are running basic antidepressants because they're way too difficult to get access to. They're too expensive. Like, we could absolutely see that because of how ham-fisted our DEA is, because of how ham-fisted our approach is when it comes to overdiagnosing. And then when we realize we've overdiagnosed, ripping those meds away. And the case in point is with Oxycontin, and I made it in a little bit.
Hang on, Francesca. Hang on. There's not shouting.
A private little
There's not shouting.
So here they're lowering my volume. You can hear it.
Let me finish. You asked me to put a question to you.
Let me put it. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Here we go.
Drugs and anxiety. Francesca, RFK.
Painkillers were overused, specifically the Sackler family, when it comes to Oxycontin, right? We all know this infamous case got millions of people addicted to Oxycontin when they didn't need to be on such a heavy opioid, right? And so what happened? Rightfully, doctors started rescinding those scripts, which was good, but then people were already addicted. So they sought painkillers on the black market, which were mostly just heroin, opioids, fentanyl, and whatnot. And ask anyone who studies these issues, it made it worse, meaning we need to understand that when you just rip meds, when you rip meds away, she wants to legalize drugs. Grant, go away. Like, my guy has nothing to add. Like, you are such a zero on this panel. Like, I'm sorry. Like, she wants to legalize drugs. I mean, honestly, yes, I would like to legalize drugs, but also, like, I'm trying to make a point, and you're just like, no, fentanyl epidemic. I mean, this is the whole thing with the fentanyl crisis. How the fentanyl crisis can be traced to big pharma. But you don't want to make those connections. You just want to, have an excuse to open 10 million fronts on the war on drugs and start going after immigrants. That's what you want to do. You don't actually want to help people. You sure as don't want to help people who are addicted. Let's say we are over medicated. Let's say there are a bunch of people who are addicted to antidepressants who don't need to be on them. Well, what's your solution? Send them to a wellness farm, as RFK wants to do. Send them to a wellness farm. Cool. I'm sure that'll go great. I'm sure that'll be access to everybody. Is it going to be free? I'm going to create these wellness farms where they can go and get off illegal drugs, off opiates, and also legal drugs. Again, I would love to be proven wrong that this is the way that the wellness farms are going to work. Sure. Something tells me no. When you rip meds away from people, you actually have to have some kind of fallback that helps them and rehabilitates them. Otherwise, they go to the street to buy street drugs. Everybody knows this. It's well proven. Okay. So they were, a little bit like, I don't know. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do